I've transformed the overworld into a frozen wasteland to add new challenge and difficulty to survival. The environment is hostile, resources are scarce, and mining has never been colder. Now it's time to add custom structures and cave biomes to bring this world to life. What new locations can we add to the Frostpale? The Frostpale project aims to be a light total conversion of normal survival gameplay. I've done a lot so far to make the game more challenging and change up the progression, and these changes are primarily dictated by worldgen. So as we add more to this dimension, we'll want to keep the primary goals in mind. Chiefly, my goal is to force new playstyles, so instead of chickens, cows, pigs, and sheep spawning throughout the snowfield biome here, you'll instead have to fight wolves in order to get access to leather, and kill goats for mutton and wool. I also want to prioritize uncommon block palettes, which is why pale oak trees are the dominant tree throughout the entire Frostpale dimension. On top of that, packed ice and blue ice have been given brick and tile variants as new building blocks, which are taken advantage of by the custom village in addition to using pale oak as the primary wood type. I also have the dual goal of increasing reliance on early game resources and making progression milestones more impactful. This is why the terrain of the world has been replaced with packed ice and blue ice down at the deep slate layers, and stone blocks are instead still pretty plentiful, but only up here on the surface. So finding and utilizing natural stone becomes much more important since it isn't quite so incidental, and you may need to rely on using wooden tools for much longer. And lastly, though I am completely replacing the vanilla overworld to create my own survival experience, I do still want most natural blocks to be obtainable. That's why throughout all of the ocean biomes, you can find these small little islands that have very tiny mini biomes on them, like birch, jungle, and cherry. And even skulk blocks can be found at the sea floor of this rare silent ocean biome. An additional goal for this step in the process is to add real player goals. Right now, the Frostpale does generate strongholds, and so the game can be beaten normally, but there isn't a whole lot of reason reward-wise or goal-wise for players to play with the Frostpale data pack rather than just play Minecraft normally. There's a lot of progression changes that are fun in themselves, but although the journey may be more important than the destination, having a destination is necessary to justify going on that journey. So with these goals in mind, let's take a look at the existing Frost Village and see what improvements we can make to it. First of all, it does look like we are getting a lot of furnace houses. I made their weight pretty high, so they spawn pretty commonly, which is important because inside of them are the furnace blocks, which are required for progression. But while making them super common in villages is one way to accomplish that, it isn't very fun because it removes a lot of variety from the villages. And despite appearances, it is technically possible that no furnace house could spawn at all, and that's not something we want either. So step number one is going to be making it so that at least one furnace house is always guaranteed, and that way we can reduce the frequency of furnace houses throughout the rest of the village. Something else I kinda glossed over in the last video is that right now, these flower pots in the village houses are about the only place that you can find these flowers, which of course are important if you want to dye things. But it's just not going to be at the quantity that players are reasonably going to need to dye things in the colors that they want. We may add a biome later on that flowers spawn in greater quantities and greater varieties, but I think at least for now, making villages that much more important for kind of side path progression, things like that, is a good idea. And so I think I'll add a structure kind of like a farm plot down there, but that specifically spawns a patch of random flowers. And lastly, currently these village houses are the only place that you can find cows, pigs, and sheep, but I did accidentally leave out chickens, so there's currently nowhere for chickens to spawn, and we're going to rectify that. So first, let's talk about some of the new buildings. We of course have all the buildings that we already had that just weren't spawning because furnace buildings were so common. But back here I have added a chicken coop, which should be just a little bit elevated off of the ground and I think looks super cute. It's got a new roof style that isn't currently represented among the architecture styles the village already has. And then inside we have 3 jigsaw blocks that are going to then spawn the jigsaw blocks that have the chicken, just like how we're handling the sheep, pig, and cow. Oop. This here's the flower patch structure, which again is much like the farm plot structure as well as the pig pen structure that again we just weren't seeing generating before. And the way that I'm handling the flowers is this jigsaw block is actually going to generate a configured feature, one of the worldgen features that we're using to populate our biomes. But instead of generating one that we're using elsewhere in the Frostpale, this one is going to generate a random patch. So it's going to cover most of this area, possibly a little bit outside of these gates, with a random assortment of flowers. It's going to be able to generate any single block flower that isn't a wither rose or eye blossom. I'm still not quite sure where I want to incorporate eye blossoms, so for now we will leave those out. And then this new house here again uses the new roof style that the chicken coop does. So again, just adding a little bit more variety to the architecture style of the rest of the village. And inside we have a nice little cartographer station that has a chest, bedroom down here. And then the second floor is really more of a hallway, though it does still incorporate the flower pot as we go up into this nice attic room, which is a big old library. There's a jigsaw block in the floor here that has a chance to spawn a villager, just like the one down on the first floor. So as you might have guessed, this is the cartographer's building. And it's going to serve a very important purpose because I think I'm going to want to use maps in order to guide and direct the player throughout the various structures in the Frostpale and direct them and guide them towards important locations for progression. So you're going to be able to find a map to another structure in the chest down there, though right now we don't have those structures. I've also added 2 additional town centers to join our little trees. So we have this fountain back here that's using bricks to help kind of showcase that uncommon block palette, which again is one of our goals. And then we have this sort of shopping stall here that's going to have the villager spawn inside of it. So that handles the chickens, the flowers, and some additional variety in buildings, as well as the starting building, the town center, but we still need to make it so that furnace buildings are able to generate at least once so that we can reduce the frequency throughout the rest of the village. And that's what these extra roads are for. So these 4 structures are the road pieces that make up the majority of the roads throughout the Frost villages, but these 4 are copies of them with the same sort of differences in configuration. The one exception is they all have a guaranteed furnace building sprouting off of them. And I'm able to do that by just making a separate template pool that has a guaranteed chance of spawning a furnace, and making the set of jigsaws that are in a row here all use that template pool and have a higher spawning priority than any adjacent jigsaw blocks. And that way, one of these 4 jigsaws is going to try to generate a furnace and succeed in generating a furnace building before any of these other jigsaw blocks have a chance to decide what they're going to generate, which could potentially get in the way. So let's give these guys a try. So here's the same village as it looks now. It does look a little bit more crowded now, but that's just because by having added all the new structures to the pools, it kind of reshuffled how everything got configured, and so it ended up having a lot more buildings placed this time rather than empty spots or farms. But we are seeing fewer furnace houses. There's none over here anymore. It looks like we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Which is a lot still, but I think it just happens to be coincidence at that point. Those are pretty low rarity. They're the same as the shepherd's house, the butcher, things like that. So I think we just got particularly lucky here. Based on the size and position, it looks like this furnace house is probably the one that was guaranteed, and so the other 3 just kind of appeared by luck, and I think that's fair. We did get 1 cartographer's house over here, but I don't see a chicken coop or a flower patch. So let's see if we can find another village and make sure those are generating. It didn't actually take too long to find this very cute coastal village, and I already see, looks like we've got a flower patch down there, and it looks like there's one up here as well. So this gives us an idea of exactly how these things are generated. We've got a generally random patch that looks like pretty contained to the inside of the fence, and we have all kinds of assorted flowers. There doesn't appear to be a chicken coop here, but I think I'm feeling pretty confident that everything there should be fine. So now that I feel like the village is in a good place, I want to add some dungeons to the underground. Currently, the Frostpale does generate trial chambers, and I've also made it so that mine shafts are able to generate, but much of the underground is still relatively basic. There isn't a lot here to reward you for exploring beyond the normal ores that you would otherwise be down here looking for. Traditionally, one of the ways that vanilla Minecraft and the vanilla overworld rewards underground exploration is dungeons. Also known as mob spawner rooms or monster rooms, these are small cobblestone and mossy cobblestone rooms that have a spawner in them, as well as some loot in chests. So I'm going to make my own dungeons. So I've gone ahead and built a couple of sizes and varieties of dungeons, and I'll kind of explain my general thought process here. The idea is, from the player perspective, they're going to be relatively simple, though rewarding. But it's the technical aspect, the worldgen perspective, that I want to be the more interesting part of them to a certain extent. But before we get into the technical, let's talk about the dungeon designs. This one is made of packed ice bricks and packed ice tiles, some of the new block variants that I've added by replacing some vanilla blocks. It has 2 chests as well as a trial spawner. At the moment, I'm thinking all of these trial spawners are just going to spawn strays, although I may add some variety later on. The trial spawner here, as well as the chests, are all going to pull from a similar loot table, though the trial spawner is going to prioritize and emphasize loot that I particularly want to be semi-renewable. This is one of the main ways that you might get some seeds in particular. Right now, getting access to wheat seeds in the Frostpale is pretty difficult. I've made it so that grass and ferns do not have a chance to drop wheat seeds anymore. So right now, the only place you can find it is in some villager houses. Making it renewable in dungeons here, I think, is a necessary and interesting direction to take that I hope will be cool. Now for each size of dungeon, this one being 9x9, I have a packed ice variant as well as a blue ice variant. So this one is made of blue ice bricks and blue ice tiles. It also has 2 chests, but is designed a little bit more like a maze, and just 1 trial spawner that again is going to have a stray. The loot and stuff is all going to be the same. This is just what's going to generate in the deep slate or blue ice layer of the world, and this one is going to generate in the stone or packed ice layer. I'm going to ignore this block for a minute, but we'll get back to it, I promise. Briefly flying over, we have the 11x11 variants that each have 2 trial spawners, and they also have slightly different internal designs. And then the 13x13 variant is quite large and has 3 trial spawners, but still just the 2 chests. Now, while I could make these custom dungeons spawn as structures like we're handling the villages, I'm instead going to make them generate using the fossil feature. Fossils are a really interesting feature type because they're the only feature type that we have on Java Edition that allows you to place structure block files as features without needing to make a structure set and all the stuff that's involved with making custom villages with jigsaws and things like that. They do have some limitations. We can't make them jigsaw structures, and getting fossils to reliably place in the locations and heights that you want can be a little bit tricky, but this kind of thing is exactly where fossils do excel at. The other cool thing about the fossil feature is that it lets you place one structure file for the base of the structure, and then a second overlay structure that's always going to get placed on top of the first one that you can apply a processor to. And that is what these extra structures for each size are for. These boxes are made of a block called Ancient Ice, which is going to replace dripstone blocks. Since we've replaced pointed dripstone with icicles, dripstone blocks don't really have a home, and the color palette, like pointed dripstone, just doesn't work in the Frostpale, so I've replaced it with this Ancient Ice block. So when one of these fossils gets placed, like this packed ice dungeon here, then the overlay structure, this Ancient Ice structure, is going to get placed on top of that, but only a random amount of this Ancient Ice is actually going to get overlaid on top of the packed ice bricks that make up the wall. So Ancient Ice is going to be a little bit of a commodity. This is the only place that it's going to generate, and it's not going to be the entire structure. It's only going to be a random amount of these walls. So let's get the structure block saved, and then we can make the fossil feature so that these generate throughout the world. So down here we've got a blue ice dungeon, so we know that these are generating. I've made them pretty rare, so hard to find any others so far. This one happens to be a little bit small, but let's go down into survival and see how this trial spawner reacts. We'll go back to creative real quick, and let's take these guys out. And let's see what kind of loot we get out of the trial spawner. Beautiful. So some wheat seeds and a little ancient ice, which I've made an advancement for obtaining. Now it looks like the floor is being replaced with ancient ice, which wasn't my intentions. So I'll probably need to remove the floors from these structures, but otherwise we're getting a great assortment of the blue ice bricks and ancient ice here. Clearly stands out from the rest, from normal blue ice, from packed ice, so I think it's going to work really, really well. Now, while just having ancient ice is pretty cool, especially when it is so rare, it isn't actually very useful right now, and so I think we should do something to fix that. Currently, because stone tools require stone in order to obtain, that milestone has been made more important, and reliance on wooden tools has also been increased. Additionally, iron tools have been completely replaced by steel tools, which requires a little bit more effort to get steel ingots in order to craft them, also making this milestone more important and increasing the reliance on stone tools just as they did for wooden tools before. However, this leaves diamond tools as being potentially too easy to get once you have those steel tools, especially since we've made them so much more common higher up in the world. And so one use that I think ancient ice can serve is to improve the progression of the Frostpale and make the diamond tool milestone more important. So ancient ice is going to be required in order to craft diamond tools and armor. Specifically for tools, the ancient ice is going to replace the stick or sticks requirement in the recipe. So diamond sword is going to need 2 diamonds and 1 ancient ice. Pickaxes are going to need 3 diamonds and 2 ancient ice, and so on. Armor also is going to require ancient ice, basically filling some of the holes in their otherwise pure diamond recipes. So you still need the same number of diamonds in order to craft diamond tools and armor. You just need to go on an additional quest to find ancient ice, which again is only going to generate in those underground dungeons. I've added advancements for both of these steps to the Frostpale advancement tab. So after you get to the steel age and get some steel ingots, you'll be directed to high up in the mountains to go and find diamonds there. Even though they do still generate at the bottom of the world, this is totally optional. But then after you find those diamonds, regardless of whether they're in the cliffs or not, you'll need to go down underground and find ancient ice in dungeons. This doesn't really make getting diamond tools or armor any harder, which is why I think it's a perfect change to progression for this data pack. I don't want the game to specifically be harder or grindier, I just want to change up the progression, change the play style, and make the player think about how they progress in new ways. Now, if we're directing the player underground, we want to make sure that there is interesting stuff to do down here. Adding the dungeons was part of that, but I also want to increase the variety of things that they're going to see down here, since right now, still, the underground is pretty samey. I really like what the packed ice and blue ice does to the appearance of the caves, and I think changing the ore textures to look like they are embedded in ice was a necessary and awesome change. But it's pretty clear that our overworld is missing cave biomes. Lush caves, dripstone caves, even the deep dark. However, these biomes specifically just aren't going to cut it. Mostly because these blocks are available already. We can't make dripstone caves because dripstone blocks have been replaced with ancient ice, and dripstone is now icicles. Moss blocks are already available in the hot springs biome, and skulk blocks are already available in the silent ocean biome. So adding any of these just doesn't make any sense. One block, or really set of blocks, that is still missing from the Frostpale is sand. So I think it would be really cool and beneficial if one of the cave biomes was a sort of underground desert. There can be plenty of sand covering the ground, something like this, and we can have cacti wherever they happen to have room to spawn. Wherever there isn't room, we can have some dead bushes, and I think we could even hang some glowberries from the ceiling, which may add some awesome additional light to the underground desert, which would make sense. It would make you feel much warmer, much brighter, which would be necessary for cacti to spawn and for bushes to die. Another set of blocks that we need is prismarine, and so I'm thinking perhaps one of the cave biomes can be a sort of coral cave that has long stretches of deltas that are filled with water. We can make some of the walls made of coral blocks so that they are hydrated by the water that's nearby, and we may even be able to have some of the coral fans and general corals spawned on top of them, or under the water at least. And this also might be where we have sponges spawn, since right now I haven't included ocean monuments as a structure that generates in the Frostpale. Let's see if we can get something satisfying for that. I think this is a pretty good start. This underground desert does appear to be a little bit small, and especially since it's in a noise cave, it's not quite reaching the ceiling, so we're not getting the glow berries here. Probably have to fly around a little bit to find an example of that. But we do have the cacti, which is what I was most worried about, and then plenty of dead bushes as well. Actually, plenty of cacti. I was a little concerned that especially with the amount of hills and things, there just may not be enough valid spawning spaces, but it seems like, at least here, not too much of an issue with that. Let's fly around in Spectator and see what the rest of the area looks like. So down here, obviously this is one of these sort of longer noodle caves that are a bit stretchier, a bit thinner, but we are seeing the glowberries here, so that is good. But just as expected, not a lot of cacti in this area because there aren't enough valid spawning spaces for them. In addition to the glowberries, obviously those are growing on sandstone, and I also added some hanging roots as well. They don't necessarily make sense logically, but I think they add a good just additional kind of color pop and texture to the ceiling of this biome. We can follow along over here, and once the cave does flatten out a little bit, we do start to see some cacti. Looks like even getting right up to the ceiling of this cave, which is pretty cool. Does make the ores stand out quite a bit when they're exposed by the sand, so we've got some gold and even some diamond here, which is very lucky. So I do think this is hitting the mark, but a little bit hard to appreciate, at least with the caves that this particular underground desert biome has happened to generate in. If we find some real nice noise caves that are kind of large and wide and particularly have short ceilings that are in a region that is underground desert, I think that'll really pop and make a really awesome experience. But even in an environment like this, it's not too dissimilar an experience than you might get upon finding a lush cave in vanilla Minecraft, and especially since there is no sand elsewhere in the Frostpale, having access to sand so that you can make grass or concrete and things is going to be really important. So even if you're not necessarily excited by or interested in the visuals, this is an important location for just kind of like side progression that the player might make as they want to decorate their house or get access to other recipes that might require glass. Let's fly around a little bit and see if we can find a coral cave. Oh, that's funny, I happened to fly right into a stronghold. While we're here, if you are enjoying the video, please remember to like and subscribe to keep an eye on when new videos come out. In addition to worldgen and structure videos like this, I'm also working on making custom biome strongholds for every biome variant in the game. And those biome strongholds are going to be present here in the Frostpale as well if you end up playing with both packs. If you'd like to get early access to the Biome Strongholds data pack as well as this Frostpale data pack, please consider checking out my Patreon. I do plan to release both packs publicly, and especially the Frostpale pack, pretty soon, but I want to make sure that my patrons are able to fully test it in early access first before I make it available to you guys. So if you want to take part in that, I would really appreciate it. Looks like we have a pretty nice coral cave over here. Let's fly closer and get that nice title. I've made it so that you only get the cave biome titles when you are underground and you actually are in the cave biome, and conversely, I've made it so you only get those surface biomes titles if you are on the surface, so you can't be underground to get those titles. Obviously, it still counts as visiting the biome, but since you can't really appreciate what makes it visually stand out as a biome, it doesn't make sense to get those titles if you happen to be strip mining a far distance underground. Now, this particular coral cave seems to have the opposite effect of that underground desert we saw earlier. The ceiling is considered coral caves, but down here, the ground is not. We do have a little bit of ground over here, and this is where we are seeing those deltas of water, and the rims of those deltas is various kinds of coral blocks. We don't happen to have a lot of water here, so we're not getting a ton of the sea pickles and seagrass right now. But I suspect if we fly around and find the rest of the coral cave, oh yeah, this has the, again, opposite effect here. So we're seeing a lot more of the coral fans and coral types that are up here. This one seems to be dead for some reason, even though it's in water, but I don't think that's a big problem. This is kind of interesting. The water around here is surrounding this, what should be a pool logically, but isn't. I don't think it's the deltas that are doing that. I don't think this is features at all. This must be just a particularly weird density function thing. We are getting the piles of wet sponge, which is perfect, so that is now an available block here in the Frostpale, and obviously we have access to all the corals too. And down here we see the intended full effect of the coral caves biome. So over here, where it's just the floor, kind of looks a little plain, a little boring. We might try and find some ways to spice this up, but I struggle to think of some good features or blocks that would populate this very well. But when we fly down here, that's where we see the ceiling that has all these sea lanterns embedded in it, so that provides some light down upon the cave without making it completely bright. And at the same time, all of the water streams that are coming down from it, all these spring features that are part of the vegetation patch that makes up the ceiling. This biome also has tropical fish, just like you would find in a lush cave. And if you use bone meal in the water here, then coral has a chance to spawn, just like if you were to do so in a warm ocean in vanilla. At this point, I'd like to start working on adding some more structures to the Frostpale. Villages are extremely important for progression, but I intentionally want them to be a little bit less common so that players have to really seek them out and in the meantime rely on those early game resources. However, I don't want to leave them completely in the dark, and in particular, I don't want them to not encounter structures until they encounter a village. So I think I would like to add something that is a little bit more common. Specifically, I'm thinking of a lumberjack camp. It'll be a small structure that has some tents, maybe some igloos, and it'd be populated by primarily vindicators, maybe a few pillagers as well, since illagers are such an important hostile threat here in the Frostpale. But I don't know if these chilling woods would be a very good home for them. This particular chilling woods biome is really big, much bigger than I was expecting and frankly would like. So I think what I'm going to do is reduce the area that chilling woods are able to cover and replace that area with a new biome that has a bunch of cut down trees. There's a few ways to make trees that look cut down. We could of course make them just simple blocks, similar to how we're handling things like these crimson roots here, but that's a little bit boring. They don't really stand out as having been cut down trees, especially once they have snow layers on top. They're just going to look really dirty and messy. So I think I am going to make them actual tree features. This is especially useful because it allows me to still incorporate these ground transformation decorators as part of the tree, since it would logically follow that the biome would have previously been a chilling woods. It would have had a tree like this that had some pale moss surrounding it, and then it got chopped down, but the lumberjacks, the vindicators, didn't get rid of the pale moss, so that's all still there. It'll also look nicer because since they'll be in groups of 4, and I may even make it so that they have the potential to be 2 blocks tall, maybe with 1 extra like that, they will stand out more clearly as having been trees rather than just random litter of single blocks. However, I do think I'll have this biome still have a few of these large trees so that the player can get access to leaves about the same as they currently can, even though the amount of leaves, and in particular the amount of giant full-grown trees, is reduced. So let's go ahead and build the lumberjack camp, and then we will make this sort of cut down forest biome for it to generate in. The lumberjack camp is going to work relatively similar to the pillager outpost structure in vanilla. We start by placing a base plate structure that is just relatively flat. It's going to adhere to the terrain, so it's going to kind of conform to the hills and things. And then all of these jigsaw blocks are going to generate all the respective individual structures spread around so that they also conform to the terrain. Relatively similar to the village, actually, with the way it handles its roads, except it's just one big road and all the structures get placed inside of it. When it comes to the actual structures that get placed by the base plate, we have this centerpiece, which has a campfire and is going to have a bucket of lava on top. Currently, the only way to obtain lava in the Frostpale is to smelt a bucket into a bucket of lava, which takes 2 coal and all the time that it would normally take for 2 coal to smelt all the way through something else. I do think it's important to have some kind of renewable and relatively accessible source of lava, but I'm not super satisfied with that method in particular. However, in the meantime, I think it is necessary until we add other ways for the player to access lava. And so this is one step towards rectifying that. These are going to be relatively common, and it's always going to be this centerpiece, so there will always be a single cauldron, a single bucket of lava at every lumberjack camp, so you can start to amass a collection either for fuel or to eventually get access to the nether. Just like with the village, we have the vindicators and pillagers spawned by jigsaw blocks that'll be placed inside some of the other structures. So unlike pillager outposts, these structures are not going to spawn an infinite number of pillagers. It'll just be sort of a one-time challenge, and I think that's good since they're going to be so common. We have a lamppost structure as well as this pile of wood, which I feel like makes a lot of sense for being a lumberjack camp, and these are going to be the main things that can spawn from all these groups of 5 blocks, which follow a similar sort of rule and scheme as the structures that shoot off from the villager house roads. And then when it comes to actual buildings or sort of buildings that are generated by these other jigsaw blocks in the base plate, we have a couple of sizes and shapes of tents, small, medium, and large. There will always be a large tent near the center of the base plate, and it's going to always have a chest in it as well as a blast furnace. I still want the player's first furnace to come from a village, but at least in the meantime they'll have access to some way to smelt something. Although thinking about it, the only things they can smelt in this are ores, and they can't get any of those until they have stone, but they could get ores from various loot chests like these ones here. I also have small and large igloos that are made of these blue ice bricks, and inside I think they look relatively warm and homey while still having this sort of cool visual effect of using ice to build with. There's a cool chimney that also goes up from this blast furnace, which of course isn't strictly necessary, but I think just adds a little bit of charm. We also have this tower made of blue ice bricks, very similar to the igloos, but this one is just a simple guard tower, very similar to the one you would find in the village, but it has these nice kind of arrow slits to shoot out from, and up top is going to always be a pillager. The loot that's in these chests is going to consist of a variety of saplings of various rarities so that the player can still get access to those wood types with a little bit more accessibility, and it's also going to have a chance for some slightly damaged tools, which can include things like shears or buckets, which of course can't be damaged, since the player won't be able to actually mine any iron to smelt until they have stone. I may add a little bit more variety to the buildings and possibly to the centerpieces later, though again, I think I'm going to make sure they always have a bucket of lava, but I think at least for now, this is a great start. Let's see how this looks in game. This is looking pretty good, even from the air, which I was a little bit worried about. Let's fly a little bit closer and take a look at the Barren Forest. So walking through it at ground level, which is the main way that the player is going to experience it, it obviously bears a lot of similarities to the Chilling Woods as far as the ground is concerned. Same features, same number of features, and the trees even appear at the same frequency. But as you can see, most of them are chopped down. And I think this effect of having the one block standing up above them, some of them are 2 blocks tall, some of them are only 1 block tall, works really well to really sell this effect that these trees have either fallen or they are chopped down. But we still have plenty of trees that have leaves on them, plenty of these fully grown mega trees, so we haven't drastically reduced the player's ability to find leaves when they are ready for renewable wood by reducing the frequency of the Chilling Woods. You can still get that from the Barren Woods here. Let's fly around for a little bit and see if we can find a Lumberjack camp now. There didn't end up being one in that Barren Forest, but there is one here on this Hail Mountain, which is another biome that is able to spawn in. I've added an advancement for finding a lumber camp, Nature's Aggressors, and we do have the centerpiece here with the campfire and lava bucket, which is very important. This appears to be the large tent that has sprouted off of it, and it sounds like several of the Vindicators and Pillagers have fallen in powdered snow. Might consider giving them leather boots. I worry that would make them too hard to deal with. It's probably just an issue up here on the Hail Mountain. We do have a single pile of lumber over here, another one over there. No lampposts, but that's okay. They are kind of random. And the guard tower looks awesome, especially up here on this mountain. So taking a look here in this chest, we have, like I said, some damaged tools, in this case shears, couple of saplings. In this case, it looks like it is mostly pale oak, dark oak, and spruce, which are going to be some of the more common trees that you might encounter. We also have birch as well, which is pretty rare. A little bit of wood, which makes sense, and then we also have an exploration map for a frost village. This is an important feature that I mentioned when we added the cartography building. I want maps to be the primary method of exploration for the player to go from one location and one progression point, really from structure to structure. These lumber camps are going to be pretty common, so it makes sense that after this, the player would go and try to find a village, and so this map hopes to help make that more possible. They'll still be quite far away. This one doesn't even appear to have any rivers or anything on it to help tell it apart, but if we were to follow this to the northwest, then we would inevitably find a frost village, which is great. It doesn't really make sense for Frost Village cartographers to have maps to lumber camps, since these are going to be more common than villages. So I think it's finally time to add a structure that can really serve as a proper goal for the player, that is a bit more rare, a bit more extreme, and has a lot more especially replayable challenge to it. Before we start planning that structure though, I want to real quick call out a comment that I got on the last video that I've gone ahead and implemented. Someone suggested that since pale oak is the dominant wood type here in the Frostpale, it makes sense that the wooden tools might be pale oak colored. It's pretty bright, and so normally this wouldn't be a good idea, except since I've already replaced all the iron tools with steel, which is much darker, there's no real concern of not being able to tell them apart. I did go ahead and leave the stick texture, as well as wherever stick textures or colors appear on tools, as well as torches, the normal color, so that things just remain a little bit more consistent across all the tools. Primarily because there would otherwise just be a whole lot of textures that I'd have to change, and I don't know if the pale oak color would work quite as well for all of those. Frankly, even the wooden tools I think look really nice with just the pale oak heads of the tool and the stick being normal. If they were pure pale oak, I don't think they would look quite as nice. I'm also thinking a little bit more now about the relationship between bricks and the terracotta blocks. In vanilla, terracotta blocks are naturally generating, although not necessarily all of these colors. In the Badlands biome, they make some really great looking mesas, almost like a painted cliffs type of situation. But that kind of feel, and especially that kind of color palette, doesn't really work here in the Frostpale, especially as far as natural building blocks go. I think it would be a lot cooler if terracotta was completely replaced with stained bricks. This is something that I've wanted in the game for a while, and I think this is the perfect opportunity to do it. Completely replace terracotta and make bricks get dyed into red or black or blue stained bricks. They'll still have a bit of a tint to them, just like the dyed terracotta blocks do, but generally they're going to work much better as building blocks, especially when you consider that this is in pursuit of prioritizing and incentivizing bricks as a building block. Now, the regular terracotta block is, of course, not dyed at all, so it doesn't make sense for bricks to be stained into it. I don't even know what color that would be, since orange is already covered. So I think instead I'm going to replace terracotta completely with chiseled bricks. Probably with like a villager face on it or something. I think that'll look really cool. Now, when it comes to planning out the structure that I'm going to build with these, I think we will have it be a sort of really tall, almost like a castle or fortress type situation. We'll have a foundation that is made of bricks, really probably primarily colored bricks, at least on the inside, because that's going to have basically like a sewers that you'll have to traverse through. This will be the main entrance into the structure. And then on top of that, I think we basically have the actual castle structure itself that is going to be primarily dark oak. Naturally, it makes sense that the structure would be populated by illagers, which have a strong association with dark oak, and this allows us to make dark oak, again, more accessible to the player. So we can have the castle made of dark oak like this, and then the roof can have a walkable platform on it as well that has birch planks, or is made of birch planks. And then the sides of the castle can have these sort of ramparts that might have varying heights of logs and spikes on it. I think it'll also branch off in multiple directions, so it'll be really wide and sprawling, again, not unlike a nether fortress. And I think we're going to call this structure the Bandit Fort. Let's start by taking a look at the foundation and some of the blocks that I've retextured to build these structures. Like I mentioned, the lower foundation of the Bandit Fort is going to be basically some sewers, and it's going to start here with this structure, which I'm calling the cistern. This is going to be in the center of the structure and has a ladder that will go up into the actual wooden castle above it. All of these sewer structures are filled with blue stained glass and light blue stained glass to represent where water and falling water will be respectively. They'll get replaced with those blocks using processors as the structures get placed. I'm using cyan stained bricks for the floor, which is of course just retextured cyan terracotta, and that has a bit of a gradient that goes up into light blue stained glass until eventually becoming light gray stained bricks at the top. And then we're using blue stained bricks for this under section beneath the water, which won't be super visible, but should create a pretty nice, if subtle, effect when you're looking through or swimming under the water. Since this is the starting structure and I want it to branch out in all directions, we have jigsaw blocks facing outward over here, and it doesn't have much of an exterior of its own. Most of the other structures are where the exterior is going to be visible. Inside, as you can see behind these iron bars, we do have a similar sewer pattern, which I'll look at in just a second. But drawing attention to the outside, it is mostly made of normal bricks so that we can make use of stairs and walls, but we do have some of the other stained bricks incorporated here for that color variety. We have a gradient from regular bricks to red stained bricks to the light gray stained bricks, And we're using white, cyan, light gray, and black stained bricks to create this really nice pillager face facade. We also have some of the chiseled bricks worked in here, which, like I said, are just retextures of the regular terracotta, and you can craft those using brick slabs just like you can for other chiseled blocks. I also think these pillars of brown stained bricks add a nice bit of visual depth to these columns, which stretch all across the entire exterior of the structure, though I hope they don't look like something else. This sort of end cap piece is going to be at the end of every branch, and so it's going to serve as the main intended entrance into the rest of the structure, into the sewers. You'll be able to swim up this falling water and either break the iron bars or just swim right underneath them to get access to the sewer section behind. That'll lead into a couple of varieties of pieces, which again, mostly actually stretch outward from the cistern rather than stretching inward from the entrances. We have a simple straight sewer section, as well as a very long sewer section, and then we have this T intersection over here. I decided not to do a four-way intersection so that it doesn't end up becoming too large to the point that it becomes unfun to explore, and also so that hopefully we can mitigate how much of it ends up carving into or floating above terrain, since it's not going to conform to terrain like the Lumberjack camp and village. The tops of each of these foundation structures then have jigsaw blocks that are going to generate the top castle pieces. This central piece here is going to be on top of the cistern, and you end up coming up from the ladder through this little cubby inside of this bookshelf, which has a spiral staircase going up into the keep on the top. We don't need any jigsaw blocks stretching out from here because those get handled by the actual tops of the foundation here so that it perfectly lines up with the existing structure. To that end, we have the same sizes of pieces over here, from the ending rampart section to the short and long straights. The long straight always having a tower at the end of it, and is always going to be an end, so it'll generate an end cap after that. And then we have the T intersection, of course. The inside of these halls are much more dramatically dark oak and don't have any windows, at least by initial design. It's possible some of the room designs that we create inside of here will. But just like with the sewers, currently the inside halls of the castle are very bare, and that is by design. We'll come back and fill all these structures with additional jigsaw pieces once we get the generation confirmed. One last thing I'll mention before we test that, up here in the top room of the central keep, I have this nice little effigy made of stained bricks and candles. The astute among you may recognize this as a Herobrine summoning shrine or altar. But it's made of stained bricks instead of gold blocks and netherrack, and obviously doesn't have redstone torches or fire. Instead, it just has various colors of candles. This serves not only as a reference to Herobrine specifically, but also expands upon and respects the existing lore of the Illagers as a cargo cult. It's something that we will pay special attention to as we end up filling this structure, but in the Woodland Mansion, they have many structures and builds made of wool to represent various things that players might find in the world, from chickens and cats to something that kind of looks like the end portal, but again, made of wool because they don't fully understand. I want to have that same kind of behavior represented here in the Bandit fort, but using stained bricks instead of wool. So just something to keep in mind after we make sure that the structure as it currently stands generates the way that we want. So let's go give it a try. Oh, that's so cool. This is exactly the effect I was hoping to get. Oh my gosh, it's so imposing, even from above. And then approaching it from the ground, and you get to really see the full scale of it, the full scope of this massive structure, the foundation that it sits on. If you come in from real low, you might barely be able to tell there's a castle up there and stuff on top of these ramparts. The Illager face is clearly looking very intimidating, doing their job exactly. This is awesome. We can fly through the sewers real quick and make sure that everything looks right. All the water appears to have changed, and yes, that does have a very nice effect with the gradient from the cyan to the blue stained bricks. This is clearly a T intersection that seems to go into either a short or a long, I'm not super sure. But then we have another grate at the end that you could use as an additional entrance or exit. The sewers aren't much of a maze, which is good. That's not what I was going for at all. I don't want it to be a challenge to navigate through the sewers. I want it to be a challenge to get through because of the obstacles that are in your way. So most of the time, unless you happen to be really unlucky, you enter through a grate and there's really only going to be one turn on your way to the cistern so that you can get access to the castle above. Now, of course, there currently aren't any challenges along the way. That'll be the next thing that we add, but the structure seems to be working well. Let's fly up into the castle section. And then from the central keep, you've got the spiral staircase that you can take up to go to the roof section, which will also have various features and structures to check out. Or you could go to the very end of one of the ramparts, very end of one of these hallways, and get access via a ladder that is at the end over here, along with some loot to reward you for getting to the end of a particular hallway. And of course, not every end of a hallway or castle section is going to have a tower. That's only at the end of the long sections in particular. So over here, this T intersection just happens to end at a normal grate and rampart combination. And same over here with this cistern branch. It doesn't stretch anywhere. It just happens to end, which I think is great. It's nice to have a little bit of variety. These beautiful canyons that it carves through the existing terrain is awesome. We do obviously get a little bit of floating over here, and it does have the chance certainly to have stretched all the way over this river. Oh yeah, even over here. Like, we do get some kind of silly generation down here. I don't think that's the end of the world. Hopefully, because of all the turning and stuff, there won't be a lot of opportunity for it to really stretch out, like if it were up on this hill instead. If it were hanging over most of this, that wouldn't look great. But it's not the end of the world if that happens naturally anyway. We'll just hopefully be able to place it in biomes where that doesn't really happen very often. Well, now that I'm satisfied that the structure is generating correctly structurally, it's time to actually work on some designs to fill in the sewers and castle roof so that there's actually something to do here. We're going to start off with the sewers, and I'm going to handle them sort of similarly to the way that trial chambers end up filling their various rooms, and the corridor in particular. Though I'll stress that this is nowhere near as complicated as that structure. Basically, we're going to have a series of jigsaw blocks in each of these structures, taking up approximately 5 wide slices of the structure, basically between every copper bulb here in the wall. So this short one only has 2, this long one has, I believe, 3, and then this T intersection ends up only having 4 because of the way that the shape ends up turning out. Each of these jigsaw blocks is then going to fill that respective 5 block deep slice with one of these slices that are over here. We have 2 designs that just have some falling water coming out of a couple of spouts, as you would expect from a sewer. A simple archway design, a bridge design, a bit of a witch's kind of brewery section, almost like they've kind of set up shop and set up camp inside of the sewers. This one has a suspended loot chest, and then this is another archway that has some signs here to kind of hint that there might be a secret inside of this arch. All of these are pretty simple, but their existence and their quantity should add a lot of variety to the structure. Although, at the moment, they don't add much of a threat. Structures like the Pillager Outpost make their hostile mobs spawn naturally as part of that structure, and that is certainly something that we could do here. Other structures like trial chambers, obviously, as well as things like dungeons, use spawners to provide their threat, and that's certainly an option as well, though I don't know if it makes a lot of sense for the illagers to spawn from spawners, since they are a little bit more of a sophisticated race. And of course, structures like piglin bastions, villages, and even our own lumberjack camp have the mobs that spawn in it spawn a single time, spaced in the structure so that they only spawn that once and just stay persistent. But that doesn't lend itself to replayability, which is something I really want to focus on for this Bandit fort, to really present itself as a true goal, both for locating, securing, conquering, and then you can conquer it again, just like a trial chamber. So I'm going to use this command block to kind of show you where I've placed several markers along these structures, along the slices here. And these markers are all going to spawn the mobs that I want for me. Think of them kind of like single trial spawners that don't generate loot. When a player in survival gets within range, between 32 and 16 blocks away, then it's going to end up spawning one illager, which might be selected randomly or be a specific illager type if I've designated that particular marker to do so. It'll just do it once, but then the marker is going to stick around and make a note of what time it is now and what time, game time, it's going to be in 1 hour. Once that 1 hour has passed, it's going to turn itself back on and be allowed to spawn a new mob, basically making it so the entire structure can be replayed in its entirety every single hour. And in fact, we're using the exact same system that the trial spawners use to designate and decide how long they should take to wait until they turn back on. but we're doing it entirely with functions, and I think that works totally fine. You don't get any loot out of these, but you are going to have some loot from here. So with that system in place, let's go ahead and build the castle pieces now. So here we have the pieces both for the castle interior that's going to be inside the hallways and the roof of the castle. And you can already see where we have that sort of cargo cult situation going on with the stained bricks, which we'll get into in a second. The interior hallways also take advantage of this. So even right here, we see that this is designed to look somewhat like a nether portal, but obviously doesn't work. We have these particles here still to help indicate where the markers are that are going to spawn illagers, and the illagers that spawn up here will be of different types, or at least at different rarities than the ones down in the sewer. So we might not get many witches down here, we might get more illusioners, for example. This one is designed to look like a trial chamber, but again is made entirely of stained bricks. So we have what looks like a trial spawner down here, the walls looking like toughened copper and such, copper bulbs. And even up here we have what appears to be something like an ominous vault, but is obviously just a chest. And this room even has a furnace, so if you decide you need more, or if you somehow find and conquer a bandit fort before a village, you can access one of those from here too. There's another witches situation up here that's a little bit more well designed, so they're not just relegated to the sewers. And then I'm actually really happy with how this ancient city portal turned out. I think it just looks so epic with the stained bricks, perfectly mimicking the design of the portal. Looks just like a warden face. We've got some soul lanterns here, and I'm even using some black carpet to represent the skulk veins that might be peppered across the ground. There's also a hidden loot chest down here underneath the portal, almost like it's representing the redstone systems that you might find underneath it in the regular ancient city. I think designs like this are especially cool when you consider that ancient cities do not spawn in the Frostpale, so this is something that the illagers would almost have impossible knowledge of, making them that much cooler. Some of the roof designs are a little bit more simplified, but again, really just trying to stress that they are building things out of stained bricks based on what they see, what they perceive, but not necessarily in a way that actually works. So this obviously is meant to look like a beacon made of emerald blocks, or instead lime stained bricks. We've got a cyan brick for the beacon, and then this awesome beacon beam made of white stained bricks. Obviously doesn't work, but they don't really understand what it is supposed to do. Obviously, when you're working with wood, it's a very good idea to have some lightning rods around to protect the structure from lightning, and so that's exactly what this is supposed to do. But again, we have a secret loot chest hidden underneath. Now, we don't just have structures made of bricks to decorate the top, we also have a few additional wooden structures that might make sense, especially when you consider the keep that's on top of the central structure there, as well as the tower. I'm really satisfied with this clock tower design. It didn't make sense necessarily for every tower to be a clock tower design, and in fact, this is going to be specifically separate from those towers. It won't overwrite them. So just in other places along the Bandit Fort castle roof, you'll find these awesome clock towers. And then this last structure is more just kind of like a resource cache or shed that might be up here. Most of these barrels and chests are not going to be filled, but a couple of them are going to have some loot, namely this one and this one. And these pieces work relatively similarly to the sewer slices as well. They're just much bigger slices. So we have those jigsaw blocks already placed on top of and inside of these hallway pieces as well. Let's see how they work. Well, already just looking at the top, it's nice to have a lot more variety, particularly with these extra buildings that are placed here. So it looks like we have a bit of an armory there. I think I see, yep, there's a shed over there. No clock towers on this one, but that's okay. And then obviously we have plenty of the cargo cult structures like the bee and of course the actually functional lightning rod. Let's fly back on down into the sewers and see how that looks. Okay, it's nice to have a little bit more variation here in the walls from the archways and the bridges and things. So it looks a little bit more intricate, though not necessarily exciting right now. Let's actually step outside, go into survival mode, and then we can see, oh, hello wandering trader. Then we can check how the illager spawning is working. So there's not a 100% chance for every marker to successfully spawn. Down here in the sewers, there's about a 33% chance that a mob will not spawn, and then up in the castle, there's going to be about a 25% chance, although some particular markers have a guaranteed chance. Ooh, we're getting attacked. The witches, of course, can be pretty threatening, though I would expect this is kind of a mid to end game structure as far as the Frostpale progression goes, so I would expect players to have probably full steel armor, possibly even some diamond, and hopefully they have domesticated some cows so they can bring milk along as well to deal with the witches. Even in these sections where it's just water coming down, it just adds that additional variety as you're peering down the sewers and preparing to fight through whatever mobs have happened to have spawned. Let's climb up the cistern ladder and into the castle and see. Yep, we're already seeing some rooms, so at least that is working. We'll see if it's working well. We have a very cool trial chamber room. Obviously no mobs have spawned, or at least no guaranteed mobs have spawned. But we've got a very nice nether portal over here, and it ends at a, oh, this is actually a T intersection. Great. Ancient city portal over here, and that extends through an enchanting room. It looks like another armory, and then a chest at the very end of the rampart as you go up to the castle roof. So all the structure pieces are generating as expected, and I'm pretty happy with the weights that they all seem to have. We're not getting a bunch of clock towers or a bunch of bees or anything like that, which is one of the main indicators that things may not be quite the rarities that we'd like. However, walking around here and seeing all the illagers, I'm realizing that although fighting the illagers is a replayable experience, there isn't much in the way of replayable loot. I do have some of the mobs that are able to spawn in the castle, and especially up here on the roof, be evokers. There's a good chance that you'll encounter some evokers here, and the fact that you can fight them every hour means that there are renewable totems of undying at the very least that you can get from here. I don't feel like that's quite enough of a reward or enough reason to stick around this location and return to it every hour or so. And I think the issue lies in these chests. Obviously, the point of loot chests is to have loot in them that you take out of them, and then they are therefore empty. That doesn't really work very well for a replayable structure like this. This is why trial spawners eject a little bit of loot on their own. So even if you've done all the trial vaults in that trial chamber, even if you found all the chests, you still get something out of the experience. And right now, I don't know if Totems of Undying and the rare chance for emeralds is enough to justify coming back here. So I think I'd like to replace these chests with something else, something that is more replayable, that rewards you for fighting through the gauntlet of illagers again and again. And similar to how trial spawners work, I want it to reward you in scale for the amount of players that happen to be nearby, so that one player doesn't just go and clear out all the chests and it kind of makes it moot for everybody else until they reset. Let's hop back into our flat world and see what we can come up with. Allow me to introduce you to the secure chest. This is going to replace all of the chests that I currently have in all the structures of the Bandit fort, and is actually a couple of entities that are riding each other. Specifically, if I turn on hitboxes, we have an interaction entity that then has an item display entity riding on top of it, which is rendering this chest model. The chest model is just a simple item model that is a chest retextured to look like it's made of pale oak, and then we've got these chains over top of it to look like it's sort of chained down. There's also a barrier block inside of this so that you can walk on top of it, just like a chest, although obviously the hitbox is a little bit larger than a traditional chest would be. The concept behind the secure chest is very simple. When you right-click it, it's going to change the model to be open and eject a random amount of loot between 3 and 5 rolls per player. You can go ahead and collect that loot. There's no GUI, it just gets ejected out of it, very much like a trial spawner in a very cute animation, and then it just sits here. The chains are moved to the side, the chest model remains open, and it has these smoke particles to indicate that it is exhausted. Just like the markers that handle the illager spawning, after an hour has passed, then they will reset, they will close, and you'll be able to interact with them again and open them for some more loot. That again is balanced and scaled to the number of players that are nearby. There are a couple of different loot tables that these chests are able to pull from. The sewer loot table has more basic supplies, but has a chance for more advanced supplies. So most of the time you'll get melon seeds, but occasionally you'll get a whole melon or a whole pumpkin. The castle loot chest has a bit better supplies, including food, more chances for more melons, and so on. And then there's also a boss loot table that is going to have much more powerful items. This one happened to be mostly food and coal. We did get a golden apple out of it, so that's pretty good. Obviously, the more players that you have with you, the better odds that you're going to get some of those higher value items, especially from these boss chests, because I've added an additional item that is going to serve as the primary reward that is unique to the Bandit fort, beyond just those totems of undying. But to fully explain that, we're going to have to leave our flat world and go back to the Frostpale. In the last Frostpale video, I made a point of mentioning that a side effect of replacing the lava at the bottom of the world with water meant that you could more easily see the transition from blue ice to bedrock at the very bottom of the world. However, that harsh bedrock texture I don't really feel works anymore given the surroundings of the Frostpales underground, mainly this blue ice. So I've changed the bedrock texture to still use all the same colors of bedrock, but fit in much more clearly as a type of ice alongside the blue ice, and specifically I've renamed it to black ice. Now you might think that this is purely an aesthetic change. What could this possibly have to do with the Bandit Fort? Well, I've gone ahead and made it so that the secure chests here in the Bandit Fort, specifically the ones up here in the castle, have a very rare chance to spawn bedrock, or black ice in this case. It's pretty rare in the regular castle secure chest, but in the designated boss secure chest, it's actually going to be relatively common and is an additional pool on top of the normal loot that you would get. Now that might sound immediately overpowered to you because, of course, black ice, by being bedrock, is unbreakable, and so to counteract this, I've actually made it so that, even in creative mode, you can't actually place it. If you grab some black ice from the creative menu, you can still place that normally. It's not a change to all bedrock completely, just the specific black ice that you get from loot chests. So if you're able to get this super OP unbreakable block, but you can't place it, why is this a valuable reward? And the answer is I've made it so that you can use black ice to craft a new black ice armor. This is the main reason that you would likely go to the Bandit Fort, for this ultra powerful armor. The black ice armor textures have just a little bit of blue or navy tinge to them, just to help differentiate them from steel armor, since they're both pretty dark grays. However, I think the complete set's effect still works pretty well. If I switch to survival, you'll see that this armor set grants a full 20 points of armor, the same as diamond and netherite, though it doesn't have the same knockback and fire resistance benefits that netherite has, which makes it pretty powerful, but not crazy. So why is it worth all this effort? And the reason is, if we hover over it, you'll be able to see that all of these armor pieces are unbreakable. You can always rely on black ice armor to never lose durability when you take damage. It'll always be there for you, and you can switch away from it if you need to use leather boots or gold helmet or whatever. As a consequence of being unbreakable and made of such a strange and raw material, black ice armors are completely inert. You can't enchant them at all in an enchanting table, and you can't even use enchanted books on them. We can't get protection on this at all. So the trade-off for having this strong and unbreakable armor is that you don't get to take advantage of the powerful enchantments that would otherwise be useful. However, it of course can't be understated that because this is unbreakable, you also never need to enchant it with mending. I'm not sure at this point if I want to also make black ice tools. I don't know that it would be quite the same effect, but maybe the black ice armor on its own isn't quite valuable enough to justify. Black ice tools would have the same trade-off. They would be unbreakable but unenchantable, so while they'd have the strength of diamond, it may be worth later on, especially if you particularly need something like Silk Touch or Fortune to have a diamond or netherite pickaxe on hand. As a reminder, the Frostpale data pack will be available for my patrons in early access. I plan to release this pretty soon, so keep an eye out for that trailer video. If you've enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe, and click that notification bell to get notified when new videos come out. I plan to do other worldgen and structure videos in addition to the upcoming Biome Stronghold video. Thanks for watching!